You to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. How's everybody doing? Good? I'm good. Everything is good. Here in, starting to feel the temperatures here in North Florida. People ask me about, because I made my pigeon announcement last week about my boy, that I got my racing pigeon, and I got 3 girls. I know everybody, I would pull them out, but these are their, I feel like I own a racehorse. You can't see it, but in here is their pedigree. Because in racing pigeon world, you don't got a pedigree. I mean, if you want to be considered like great grandparents, I'm telling you, they're real snobs about this. And but yeah, I got my 3 girls, and I'll keep you guys abreast of what's going on. Let me see if I can find a picture of my last 3 arrivals. I've got, because I'm going to start off with 4. And I just got 3 hens that I got from the same loft. And yeah, I'm doing a crash course on pigeons, and believe it or not, I'm surprised because I never knew, what goes on in pigeon world until you become immersed in it, and you realize that there's multi-million-dollar purses out there that are given out. And I was talking to one gentleman, and he's telling me, oh yeah, so-and-so, that he bought a couple of pigeons for $30,000 a couple. I was like, what? $30,000 for a pair of pigeons? I was like, holy crap. But yes, pigeon world is like this. It's very interesting once you get into it, how much money there is in it, and how much people, what's the word I'm looking for? How much they're involved and how much money they go in there. And it's like, and one guy I was talking to, he has a pet shop not far from where I'm at. As a matter of fact, I should give him a shout out. He's out in Chiefland, Florida. His name is The Bird Guys. He's got this great little pet shop in the flea market out in Chiefland, which is, a little bit like central North Florida. He's got a lot of animals, as far as, the birds and the reptiles and things like that. But besides that, he used to do pigeons, and he's mentoring me. But he was the one that was giving me the scoop on basically all that goes on in, let me see, here we go. Let me see if I can bring him on. So I feel like, like when people like, hey, the grandkid or something, let me see. Hold on. If I can bring it up so you guys can see like my latest, I don't want to say addiction because that's what he called it. He says, that people get addicted to this stuff. Let me see. Hold on. Oh, come on, Marlene. Yuck. Okay. This is not cooperating. I don't want you to. Forget it. You know what, guy? Wait. Windows. Let's see. Here it is. Yes, it is. Here it is. Yes. Those are my 3 new girls. Okay. And you might think, and you go, man, I've seen dozens of those out in the park. Let me tell you something. They cost me a pretty penny. That's all I can say. So I'm going to use them for breeding purposes, of course. So yes, that's that's my latest addiction. Anyway, this week we have a new guest on Stories of the Supernatural. Her name is Brice Watson. She is the host of Esoteric Atlanta. And I could use your bio, but forget it. You do too many things, Brice. So talk about yourself and what you do.
I'm just a classic weirdo. I think most of us are secretly.
Yeah, it's like,
Yes.
It's
So
weird little heart, just like mine. Yeah.
I love it. I feel like when we were locked down, that allowed a lot of us, when we had nothing else
Yes.
to do but go down these weird rabbit holes. And I've said on my channel, growing up in the deep South, I kind of started that with my channel. Like, the deep South is known for its like fundamentalism, Bible Belt, but there's also a side of the deep South that is very eccentric. When you look at Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, in the book and the movie, they start off talking about the guy who walks the ghost dog. And I'm like,
Yes.
that's normal. That's what, you guys don't do that in other parts of the world. Like, that's we would go to church on Sunday, but my mama was the first person to tell me a ghost story. Everything's haunted. It's hot and humid, just like in Florida. So I think that adds
Yes.
to it. There's voodoo and hoodoo everywhere. So this is this eccentric side. And I thought, you know what? When lockdown happened, I was like, I've always loved I'm sensitive to the paranormal. I've always loved the folklore, the legends. I'm very aware of what's going on in the world as far as the grand awakening. We'll say we're all in. And I just started looking into all these old folklore and legends in the South, and looking deeper at them to see where the deeper story lies. Because nothing, things don't come from nothing. Like, there's
Of
always
course not.
a story. And so, I start, we've talked about the Werewolf of Georgia. We talked about all these, and then of course that drove me into other topics and meeting other people. And I know you wanted to talk, and I love this, about the goings on of the Son of Sam case. And
Right. Before we rolled, folks, we were discussing, okay, if we talk about everything we want to talk about, we'll have like a 5-hour show. So, and yes, go ahead, Brice, because there's a lot in that book that Terry Maury wrote about the ultimate evil, but there's one in particular. Yes, I've got mine's in my truck on the dashboard because yes. And when I need a page, I'll just photograph it with my phone, if I want to reference it. But yes, go ahead. People don't realize that branches off into so many areas as far as what he found.
well, David Berkowitz, on
Yes,
paper, is the person who is Son of Sam. So just to
sure.
get that's what the narrative is, that he was this serial killer that went loose in New York in 1976. And, for me, I was born in 1983. So I was born after the happenings, but I grew up I knew about, just like we knew about Ted Bundy, we know about
Right. Yeah.
but I never gave it a second thought. I always just, okay, yeah, that Berkowitz guy. And then I met my friend Doug, who, R.I.P., he's no longer, unfortunately, he passed away quite recently, actually. And he is an ex-Scientologist. And he had this whole series a series on his channel, which I believe is still up on YouTube. It's called Nice But Not Confused. Doug Kramer, you can just type his name in. And he had this whole series, Being Raised in a Secret Society. He had 2 seasons, and he broke down like all these different elements of being raised in Scientology. And then he got to what he called the Summer of Psyops, which was, he talked about Charles Manson and David Berkowitz. And the first time I watched that, I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Like, this is a cover up. This is not, there's so much to this story. And that's the first time I had heard of Maury Terry and all. And Maury Terry is no longer alive either.
Right.
And why would they cover this up? Like, if there was a group of people doing these heinous violent, well, first of all, let's back up a little bit. David Berkowitz, if you look at all of his victims, his behavior does not match that of any other serial killer.
Right. There was, and of course, once there was a few, the description from different witnesses many times did not look anything like him.
Nothing like him. Nothing. So from the beginning, there was this, and you read different accounts from different people, that some people, and listen, we know that I think from a very grounded perspective, I just want to say that I am fully aware that there are police officers who work for New York City or any other police agencies across the nation or in other countries who have good intention and want to do the right things. I totally understand that sometimes there are blocks with the higher ups. Sure. I get that. And I do, from what I understand, know that there were some cops that were like, this is not this isn't the guy. But they felt like they had their guy. You know, a lot of these people that were involved in the arrest back in 1976 were up for re-election.
And there was so much pressure from the public at that time.
In New York City, at that time was it was like it wasn't the West, it was the Wild Wild East. It was a lot of crime. I know that the first victim they thought they put her to the side for a little while because they thought she was a mistaken identity mafia hit, because the mafia kind of ruled New York at that time. And she was a young girl, two young girls actually in a car that were coming back from a nightclub. And so what would an 18-year-old, you know, so obviously, oh, this was a mistaken identity. Why else? Because usually with serial killers, we see a level of like stalking a little bit. They usually have some sort of like intimacy with their victim, not necessarily in the sexual way, but like they get some sort of personal. Yeah,
there's some connection that maybe they only have it in their head, but.
Exactly. But these were just random people. These were random people, you know, that it was females with brown hair. You know, around that time, people in New York were going around, and women, and cutting their hair, dyeing it different colors, because there was a specific, but it was different walks of life. It was different. You know, in one case, there was a man that they think he survived. That they thought they mistaken him for a female because his hair.
Yeah, because back then men were wearing their hair longer. This is the 70s.
Yeah. So from what I understand, Carl Denaro is his name, and from what I understand, he has been very vocal about the fact. I don't want to say he believes it was just David Berkowitz or not, but he's been very interested in Maury Terry. He worked with Maury Terry for a little while, so in a lot of way, like the math wasn't mathing, right? It just did not make sense, and so Maury Terry, and God bless Maury Terry, because he put back in the day when he was putting his research together almost immediately after the crimes happened, you know, he didn't have the internet. He didn't have.
Let me tell you that. And when you read that book, you realize at the beginning, he really didn't think it was going to go where it did. He was just thinking it was a crime story.
Right. He was a reporter.
From some crazy guy, and that was it.
Yeah. And he knew that he had covered some of the MLK riots in New York. And he knew that the media at that point, which is very telling, that the media has the propensity to spin stories in a way that aren't always factual, which I thought was super interesting that he...
Right, or what they say, omission of the truth. We'll just not talk about that.
We'll just not talk about it because we don't want people to know, which that's not supposed to be journalism. And I respect Maury Terry for being like, hold the brakes. Like the public, he was also a citizen of the area, so there was personal concern. And, you know, who wants to discover that there's a satanic cult working in your backyard? Like,
no, you could tell he himself had a lot of doubts when he started putting all these pieces together. He himself was like, what?
And it connects to the higher up, which thing goes back to explain why there was such a cover up. And again, I don't even know, like, I want to give some of the police officers the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they just got swept up. Yeah, we got our guy. They didn't realize. And even to this day, from what I understand, it's hard to get like information. It's hard to like get them to open this back up again. You know, I actually, and I know this might sound bad, and I through my research into this case, I actually have a lot of empathy for David Berkowitz. Like, I know he participated in some of it, but I think he was under like mind control. I think that he had found his way into a cult, a family, and he's the scapegoat. He was the fall guy. And I wanted, you know, when I started looking into my friend Doug's information, you know, obviously he got a lot of.
I'm gonna show real quick, Brice. This is the sketch.
Yeah.
That they look at all these different people. Here's David Berkowitz. Come on.
I know there was like a blonde. There was one could have potentially been a female.
Yes.
There was ballistics on how the bullet here. I think it was Carl Denot, the guy. I believe it was the ballistics of the bullet that hit his head. And it's crazy they can figure this stuff out. It came from either a very weak man or a woman. The way that it was so. And Berkowitz was like, he was a kind of a chubby big guy. Like he would have had more stability if he were the
right. One. And I think also the prosecutors, they were afraid that case was going to fall apart if they introduced there's more than one person. Because let's face it, you know that the defense for Berkowitz was going to say, whoa, then wait a minute.
There's
my guy didn't do it.
Right.
So I think everybody there, from the police, the mayor, whoever, like all the head honchos, were like, that's Dark Man, the only one.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I actually through this got connected with my friend. His name is Rocker Mike. He's up in New York. And
yes, I saw that great interview you did with him.
He's great. He has a whole Son of Sam Chronicles, and he's really good at really, because he's from New York. And sometimes I feel like when we're looking at the logistics of the Berkowitz situation, we'll say, it's easy to look at a map of all the where all the victims were.
Yes.
Think, oh, okay, we could see how, but like I know in Atlanta, Georgia, because I know that there's no way that right now I could get to I live in Midtown, that I could get to downtown Atlanta in less than 30 minutes, even though it's only a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
I know that because I'm a native to this area.
Right.
I know there's traffic, there's one-way streets. It's just not possible. Most cities are that way. So when you look at the map as someone who's not native to New York, you think, oh yeah, he could have, that it wasn't possible. It's not physically possible for him to have gotten to all these locations. So, and hearing Rocker Mike, these New Yorkers talk about this, and they know all the back streets. They know, just like I know in Atlanta, and to be able to try to figure out how this could have happened in the timings that it happened and where Berkowitz was, it's again, the math's not mathing. It's not making sense. But from someone not from New York, it might look like it makes sense. But to understand the city in that sense, and so and Rocker Mike actually gave me this Dead Names. Right. Which goes into, it's about the Necronomicon, but it goes into the Son of Sam murders in 1976, because this book is following the occult group of New York at that time, because at that time, that's around the time they were translating the Necronomicon, this stolen old book, and it's a fascinating read. And again, occult just means hidden knowledge. So, it is what you do with it is what makes it good or bad, right? And even in this book, the writer Simon talks about I'm even listened to a recording of him, and he said, don't ever do anything where you're having to do a blood ritual. Like he was like, that's
absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm telling you right now, that's like anything you have to feed with blood, anything you have to feed, period.
Not good. Yeah.
Not good.
And he talks about, which I appreciate that. And he talks about in this book, Simon, that there were other people that wanted, because he's very knowledgeable in esoteric and occult stuff. And there would be all these people trying to get him to come over and help them summon demons. And he was like, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not messing with that. And so I wanted to give some respect to this guy for being you have to put governors on yours. When you're going to get into the world of magic and occultism, there is a good path and there is a bad path. And you have to pick which one. And you're right. And when we look back, I'm a huge student of the law of one. The law of one says it very simply. And this polarity with darkness and light, the darkness can't create anything. Only the light can create. So what the darkness does is it steals from the light and it inverts it, or it tries to mimic it. That's why the darkness requires blood rituals, because it can't create. And that really, when I was first started studying the law of one, I was like, that explains it all. And
you know what's really interesting? And I think what a lot of people, even back then, was when Mortari gets into that book, he's talking about even a bi-coastal group.
Oh yes. Oh,
this was not just strictly New York.
No.
And that the underpinnings of the pornography, the drugs, and everything were this satanic, dark deeds kind of group. That, in other words, because a lot of people think of crime just strictly crime, but he's saying these people were motivated, that what basically brought them together was that they all had this very dark ritual belief system. Whether you want to call it Satanism, I don't know, or whatever you want to call it.
Whatever, it's darkness, and it's the thing about Lucifer, Satan, the dark, whatever you want to call that,
right?
The devil, whatever the devil will give you stuff. But it comes at a cost. You constantly have to feed it. Whereas the light gives you stuff for free. The light,
right? There's no. And what's really interesting is that a lot of the people that Berkowitz hung out with around that time, they all died horrific deaths.
Yeah, and there's some questions as to whether they were natural death, you know. So
Yes.
listen, there's no loyalty amongst thieves, right?
Oh,
Like
no,
they
no.
turn on each other and they'll use each other and turn on each other.
Yes.
And, you know, the devil will give you quick power, quick fame, but it always comes at a cost. It always comes at a cost. And I personally, like, I rescue dogs in India. Like, I could never see an animal's life be taken, much less a human. Like, I could
Oh my
never.
God. I read that it must have been like,
I can't, and that's what Berkowitz found out. So I'm not Berkowitz, Maury Terry found out. And this book goes into it as well. These different covens in New York, and you follow the layers up. Like even in the Son of Sand case, it gets tied into potentially a producer, a Hollywood producer.
yes.
And when the guys at Studio 54, the mysterious deaths that they went through, and that again, the pornography and that type of human, we'll say carpooling, because I know the T word is not a good word for YouTube, but you guys know what we're talking about. And this all went back to, and this is what I found so fascinating, because we hear these stories, but when we're given a location where we can actually go and see this for ourselves, I think that's when it becomes very real, and very real for New York, for anybody in the world, just to actually see this. And this was Untermeyer Park, which is in the Yonkers, New York area. And this is one of the areas where allegedly, we'll say for legal purposes, allegedly this, in my opinion, this group would hang out. And everything I've learned about, again, the darkness cannot create anything. It can only steal from the light. But the darkness, because it can't create anything on its own, it's very particular about where they do rituals, where they do. So my mind goes, well, if they're working in Untermeyer Park, what is Untermeyer Park? Because they don't just pick random places
Right.
to do things. They're harnessing, they're trying to harness energy.
Right. And you might, at first blush, you might think, well, it was like an abandoned kind of place. And you think, oh, that's perfect. But there's more to it. And go ahead. Yeah.
There's more to it. So my first part, and y'all, I'm from the South. Like I'm not from the North. So I've been to the North many times. I'm not familiar with this Untermeyer character. But I was like, who is this park named after? What significance does Untermeyer have to do with the occult? And boy, this is, I call myself like a Nancy Drew sometimes, but I'm just nosy. I'm petty and I'm nosy. So that's why I snoop, because I want to know why. Why are they doing these shenanigans in this particular park? So Untermeyer was born in 1858 in Lynchburg, Virginia. His parents, and this is what was interesting to me, because again, I'm from the South. His parents were immigrants from Bavaria, which was a state in Germany. A lot of Jewish people lived there at the time, and they came over as immigrants to the United States. Oh, hello. Most of us are immigrants to the United States.
Right, right.
Well, Samuel's father, Isidore, he became what was known as a planter, which is like a plantation owner. Let me tell you something about the plantations in the South. By 1858, so this is right on the precipice of the Civil War.
Right.
By the time they immigrated to Virginia, the plantations, that was the gentry of the South.
Yes.
That was the aristocrats. You didn't just immigrate to America and boom, now you've got a plantation with slaves.
Yeah, of course, I'm sure.
It took, this is generations in the making. So my question is, how did he all of a sudden come being this like immigrant, become a plantation owner? Because this was a socioeconomic caste that relied heavily on cash crops like tobacco, sugarcane, cotton, coffee, etc. So he moved from being an immigrant, a Jewish immigrant in the South. There's nothing wrong with being a Jewish immigrant.
Yeah. No.
But logically speaking, in the South, he comes and he all of a sudden is a part of this gentry where he.
Well, it's exactly, and I want to point this out because it's just not the South, but when there's families that are cliques, just like when you see the Age of Innocence, how in New York, in the Gilded Age, there were these families, which were the 400, which was, if you weren't belong to that, you just couldn't step in and say, I'm there. I don't care how much money you had. So somebody kind of like eased his way in somehow, but
I think I know who it was too, as I started to dig deeper, because that is someone who's not from the South, they might not pick up on that. But I was like, okay, no. You don't just sneak in and all of a sudden you're in this debutante, you know, a very, very high classy white plantation owner. You're your own socioeconomic cash crop. We're living off of free labor like that.
Yes.
So who did you know that got you in there? And so basically, as time goes on, I'll get to who I think got him in. But during the American Civil War, his father served as a lieutenant for the Confederate Army. He ended up dying. So Isidore died in 1866 when Samuel Untermeyer was 12 years old. So after his death, the father's death, this was weird to me too. The family up and moved to New York City. Now, this is 1866, y'all. A woman by herself, an immigrant woman by herself, who women didn't even have the right to vote at this time.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it's only been 50 years since women were able to have their own credit card. Like, for a woman by herself with these children to be able to up and move to New York City, who's paying her bill? Where's all this money coming from? So this is what's going through my mind. Because, I mean, I'm all for female power. Like,
no, exactly.
But this doesn't make this, it's not adding up to me for this time period, for 1866. A widow without her husband. So I kept digging. So meanwhile, they're in New York. Untermeyer, Samuel, goes to Columbia Law School, and he graduates in 1878. After being admitted to the bar, he started practicing law. So he opened up what was going to become one of the most powerful law firms in New York City. And he opens it with his little brother, Maurice, a guy named Louis Marshall, and his cousin, Guggenheimer.
Imagine that. He was tied to the Guggenheimers?
Guggenheimers. And I'm imagining it's through his mother's line.
Okay. There you go.
That's what I'm thinking, because Untermeyer is his last name.
Yes.
So Randolph Guggenheimer. So they had the Guggenheimer, Untermeyer, and Marshall law firm for 45 years. And they were like they weren't mafia, but when I think about how people describe it, it's like you didn't want to go up against this.
I was going to say, those are my attorneys. I was like, forget it. We'll settle whatever.
I'm done.
Yeah.
So the corporate law, they did a specialty in stock market regulations, government ownership of railroads, and advocate for legal reforms. So some of this stuff sounds good, but if you really think about it, what this law firm really wanted was more government control.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's what it sounds like.
It's government control. They don't want private people to be able to, we're seeing that now. You'll own nothing and be happy, right?
Right. Yeah. Or competing, being able to compete like a competitive marketplace. No,
they were specializing it. They were the first attorney. He was the first attorney to make $1 million on a single case.
That speaks volumes back then.
So I don't even know what that would translate to today in today's money. So this guy was powerful as an immigrant. And I'm all for that. I totally believe in the American
dream. And you want to think how many secrets that guy knew about people that
we're going to get to that because he had some secrets.
Talk about that client attorney privilege.
Yeah. Y'all heard of Epstein, right? Well, let's talk about our first. Apparently, Untermeyer was doing a little bit of what Honey.
Oh, imagine that.
We're going to see Untermeyer step into D.C. in a kind of shady way. So he believed in big government. He was a Democrat who served as a delegate to the Democrat National Convention from 1932 to 1936. So he's big into government, big into politics. He was also a Zionist. I'm going to leave that as there because you guys have your own thoughts on that. And he also believed in eugenics.
Oh boy, there you go. Boy, there he lines up right there.
He's
everything.
He's a winner, isn't he?
Oh boy, is he. And then you know what? And this is the thing. He was very powerful. I'm sure not only because of his money, but because of his connections.
Oh, absolutely. He was obviously, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, he was born into one of these quote unquote families.
Yes.
So in my opinion, his family was already practicing we're practicing Satanist, in my opinion.
Yes.
I'm just going to make that very clear. Now, he really, really, really backed the Federal Reserve. Now, I've gotten in a lot of trouble talking about that, but basically just to keep it on the down low, there's a book called, I believe it's called The Monster of Jekyll Island or something like that.
Yeah, The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Yeah. Jekyll Island's an island off of the coast of Georgia where all these big families in New York, the big ones, Rockefellers, Morgans, those guys, they would get in their boats and come down they would fly south for the winter, basically.
Right.
When the winter months were harsh in New England and New York, they'd get in their boats and come to Georgia. And they would live their summer, which sounds nice, right? Well, there's even more stories about the parties that they had on this island.
I bet.
Yeah.
If walls could talk.
Well, that's ghost stories. We could get it because the walls do talk sometimes.
Oh, there you go. See? Yeah.
Jekyll Island is public now. They do have a resort. I don't much like Jekyll Island. I always felt weird on it. But this is where this group of people created the Federal Reserve, which I'm just going to leave that there because I don't want to get your channel in trouble. But y'all,
no, I mean, yeah, 1912. That was important.
We're building up to, and he wanted that. And we have that whole Titanic story about the potential of these big.
Yes, who was it? The one that went down with the Titanic? I can't remember. Was it
big guys that were very much against?
Yes.
And thought is a really bad thing. Taxes, as far as they are unconstitutional. They absolutely are. And this is not financial advice. This is just research. Please research for yourself. So President Woodrow Wilson was the president who signed the Federal Reserve into, he didn't sign it. It's not really a part of our government. I don't even know how to describe it. It's a private bank, right? He did it during the time of the darkest time of year, which is the high holidays for the Satanic faith, which is December 21st through December 25th, right? The darkest time. It's when and I feel like I always felt like he had signed it in duress, that he was under duress, which, we know that they're puppeted. Well, then I learned about Untermeyer and absolutely. So the story goes, allegedly, that Woodrow Wilson had an affair before he was put into the White House. And affairs are scandalous now.
Oh, back then, that would have been like awful.
Well, the woman, his affair partner, after the affair was over, I think it was like her nephew. So there was a child in her family that needed financial help. And so she hired Samuel Untermeyer to represent her. And she sent basically a blackmail letter to Woodrow Wilson as president.
She must have been somebody, because I can't imagine you just go to see the Untermeyer firm.
Like, can you get the president to pay me all that? I can't.
Exactly. So she must have been somebody. Yeah. Okay.
35. I mean, big money back then, big money now, but big money back then. So Untermeyer goes to President Wilson. Imagine this. Imagine the audacity of you're sitting in the White House and you're giving the president of the free world, basically, this letter. And you, as Untermeyer, know the president doesn't have this money lying around. Nowadays, presidents make millions off of whatever they're making.
Yes, exactly. But back then, no.
No. So Untermeyer goes, I'll do you a solid. I'll pay it for you if you just do what I want you to do politically.
And he was in a tough spot. Think about it.
There you go. So that's what I talk about, like the honeypotting. Yes. He was Epstein before Epstein was Epstein. So
that's a good. Was it maybe a question of a honeypot even before? I mean,
or did he just take advantage of a good situation? This woman came to him, and he was that conniving to be like, I don't actually need the money, because he didn't need the money,
right?
But I need the power.
Well, the thing about the honeypotting is that even from the get-go, it's a setup.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's a setup.
So who knows, maybe if she was introduced to him and facilitated, and it's like, we'll let that stew for about a couple of years.
We'll get the evidence, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was super. So that's how a lot of the, for us today in 2024, we're living the effects of Untermeyer. Even if we don't know who he is, in the United States, you're living under a lot of stuff that he was able to get done in the United States that was unconstitutional because he was working the system with Woodrow Wilson. So, and I was shocked. Because I've studied Wilson, I've studied the Federal Reserve, all that stuff, but I never run across this story. And I was like, oh my God, Samuel Untermeyer should be studied by everyone, because he literally is the puppet master.
Right. That power behind the throne kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know what, people like that is like, fine, just keep me out of it as long as I get what I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people also have a hard time, like you said, he had plenty of money. It was the power thing.
It was the power. And that is why too, you know, when is there enough power? When is there enough money? Well, if you're a practicing Satanist,
you're never going to hit saturation point on that. Never.
You're feeding the beast, right? And that's the thing too. I have to remind myself this as well. When we're looking at these cases and we're looking at these people, I think sometimes we're looking at these people's actions through our own perception of our own moral compass. You know, for me, I don't need that much money. I don't need to be a billionaire. I don't want all that power. I have a hard time managing my dog on a leash. Like I have no business trying to like control. I don't want to control other people. You know, you do you, boo. As long as you're not hurting anybody, you do you. I think that should be the American logo, right? That's the American dream. You do you as long as you're not hurting anybody. But these people, they're raised in this dog eat dog environment. They learn this manipulation at a very young age. They're in a religion, we'll call it what it is, a religion where they're having to feed entities, you know. So it's thank you God. Like, I don't care how much money these people have. I am so grateful I was not raised in one of these families, because I already have enough childhood trauma. I don't need that on top of it. You know, it's in with the whistleblowers, I know what these kids go through at a very young age.
Right. When you listen, that you always think, you know, everybody thinks that all this money solves all your problems. I'm not saying all rich people, by the way. No. I'm talking these certain families where the practice is to traumatize a child. And also in some cases, you know, we could go into the ultra K or, you know, MPD, multiple personality, all the broken psyche. People don't realize that is commonplace in these family groups and that's why also there's a lot of intermarriage, as far as maybe not incest directly, but if you look at their bloodlines, hey man, you guys are more than kissing cousins.
Oh, and I know, and that's so I've dug into bloodlines because I'm O negative, which is what a lot of them are, and really? O negatives tend to have more paranormal. That's a whole other show we can
That's
do.
Interesting. That I did not know that.
I researched. Well, my great grandfather was born into the English royal family, so I think that's where I get it from. He pulled away. He gave his life actually to get his daughter out of that situation. So I'm very grateful to him. But this is not what I believe at all. I've made that very clear. I believe that you are perfectly and wonderfully created by God. Whatever your blood type is, whatever your skin color is, whatever your eye color is, you are made that way by God. You are a fractal of God. And your blood type, different blood types do give different personality traits, but it's you. It makes you you. They, however, believe that the O negative blood type is what they call the pure bloodline of the gods.
Yes.
Because there's nothing in it. So I don't have any antigens. I don't have the rhesus factor. And actually there are some biological differences. Again, that's a show. We could do another show on that. But they try to keep it very pure. And back in the day, I believe in my research, back in the day when they didn't have blood testing, they were able to tell bloodline by the certain biological side effects that people have of particular, like I have an extra bone, I have an extra organ, my eye shape in the back of my eye is different. There's all these different there's different ways to tell. And that's why they called it like the divine right of the bloodline, like from royal families. So they do.
Plus, they kept very good genealogical records of. They knew.
They want to make sure because they believe, and that's a sign of the negative side. Negative side, according to the law of one, believes in a pecking order, right?
Yes.
There's elitism, and then there's the peasants. The side of light believes everyone is equal. It's a social memory complex. We're all a part of this, all of us. And so, but it is interesting. And we again, if your audience wants to, we can do a whole show on
that. For sure. You're going to be talking about this another, for sure.
It is fascinating. It's good information for you to have. And, you know, knowledge is power, knowledge protects.
Yes.
And even if you research this stuff and you yourself don't believe it, like I don't believe it, that I don't believe it's true that some bloodlines are better than others. I don't believe that, but I know they do. And so when I know they do, then I can look and see what patterns they're doing. Like, for example, I learned, this is allegedly, guys, I'll have to say, that as an O negative, there are certain diseases or certain things that went around, fancy flus that went around that I can't get.
There you go.
Because they don't create anything and put it into our world that they can get.
Oh, of course. And I'm not surprised by that at all. At all. At all. Because that sounds, unfortunately, very plausible.
Oh, yeah.
Very possible.
Well, first time I saw it, it was with HIV. That rhesus negative people, allegedly, I will say, allegedly. And I was like, those sons of bitches. Like, the fact that they would, first of all, create this to hurt people, to create devastation, but then be that maniacal that they would make sure they were exempt.
Right.
Like, I mean, it is, but that's their religion. That's what they practice, you know? And again, I'm all for it. Like, you believe, I always say on my channel, listen, if you want to worship fairies in your backyard naked, sounds like a good time. Like, you exactly. Do you, boo. As long as you're not hurting anybody else.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about, really, what it is.
Yeah.
Like, live and let live kind of philosophy, as long as children are not involved and you're not hurting anybody.
Don't run around naked in front of a child. You know, like, don't, you know, but, and I think most people, I will have to say, in my journey throughout this, I think most people are that way. Most people would never hurt a child, would never, you know, but for them, and they do know the sicknesses, they do know, like you're talking about the disassociation, they know how the brain works. And they know if they can traumatize a child by a certain age, they can disassociate the brain.
Yes. And
therefore they can program the child to be a certain way as an adult. And I know that sounds so maniacal, you guys, but again, you're a listener.
And they're doing it against their own children is the thing.
Yes. I would give my life for my nephew and nieces. I absolutely, without it, I would give my life for my dog. Like, without a hands down, I would take the fact that they would do, it's a different mindset, but they were treated that way as children. So it's this patterning. So when you look at people like Untermeyer, this is why he's pulling the puppet strings of the United States government, is because he's got enough money. So anyway, but backing up a little bit, in 1866, Sam purchased, I call him Sam, I don't know, it might be a little disrespectful to the spirit world because he's dead now, but Sammy boy.
Okay, he needs to be disrespected. Keep going. Forget it. Because I know where this is going, so believe me, disrespect him all you want. He's like
Sammy boy. I always create nicknames for my subjects that I'm deep diving on. So, he purchased an estate that was previously owned by the 25th governor of New York City, Samuel Tilden. Now, this was a 150-acre estate in Yonkers, New York, adjacent to the Hudson River. We know flowing rivers, if you know anything about magic, or flowing river gives energy for the good side. Like, if you're ever feeling like overwhelmed, if you want to spiritually cleanse, just go get in a river for the day in nature, and it will cleanse, you know, your aura, that running water. But they use it as a conduit for negative. But remember, guys, darkness can't create anything. So everything that they've manipulated and made dark, it's up to us to heal and make light again, because it was originally created for
and people don't realize also back then there was nothing out there. When he purchased that, it was a very large estate, and I think he also bought he kind of cleared his neighbors out. It
was like 150 acres of his own little.
And people find that hard to believe that in New York, New York City, you could find 150 acres, but back then, there was available.
It was the turn of the century. It was. So he developed the elaborate gardens and made this his primary resident that he called Greystone. Now, I also want to name drop another person that allegedly, and I feel like I have to say allegedly because we don't have any direct proof of this, but there's enough speculation that it bears repeating. So it is believed that Untermeyer's wife was close associates with Aleister Crowley during this time.
There you go. Yippee.
Yeah. So that's, you know, and so I wrote my notes in modern times, journalist Maury Terry would go on to talk about a dubious secret society in New York called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And which had also a ties to Aleister Crowley and Scientology, and of course the Son of Sam murders. So the way that Sammy boy designed his gardens it wasn't just landscaping for the joys of it being pretty. You know, they don't do things for pretty. They do things specifically for their occult practices, right? So It was very Persian in design. It had a replica of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which I'm kind of curious because we know our geography is wrong. Like we know it's all wrong. Like I've lots of evidence that Egypt is actually here in the United States, and that
I've read on that. And the first time I read, I went, "What?" But that's but that's a whole other show. We're gonna have to come back, Brice, and we can do that. That's another show, but we're gonna do it. Yes.
The fact that there was a Hanging Garden of Babylon, and we know that Egypt, we speculate that the Egypt in Africa is the decoy Egypt because there's way more pyramids in America than anywhere else in the world.
Yes.
And Tennessee actually is the country of ISIS, and there's all this weird stuff going on. That's a whole story. So I was like, that's interesting. Did he know something? Because we know that the kids who grow up, the benefit of growing up in the Illuminati is that you get the true history.
Sure.
You get to learn the true history. And then you get to laugh at everybody else when they've been brainwashed to learn the false history.
Yes.
So he had sculptures of winged lions, Roman pillars that were 2,000 years old, multiple altars all around the gardens. There was a carriage house that they then called the Devil's Cave, which is now gone. After he passed, there was temples with Medusa's head, temples of love with 1,000 steps, hidden nooks, and hidden altars constructed in original design. So here's this guy sitting on this 150 acres with these freaking temples and altars.
Yeah, he had like a sphinx, and he had a bunch of unusual statuary in there.
And sometimes if you're poor and you're weird, you're just a weird, poor, creepy guy.
Exactly. Peculiar.
You're peculiar. If you're rich and you're weird, you're just eccentric.
Yes.
So did the people think he was just this eccentric rich guy? Like at this point, I'm like, no, the South is eccentric with our ghost dogs. This guy was a Satanist.
Yes.
He was a Satanist, in my opinion. And I think he was using his property to perform all these rituals, to summon whatever. They had a lot of parties there, If his wife was if she was truly associated with Aleister Crowley, then God knows what was being brought to that property to do even more. We can only speculate.
Which, by the way, Aleister Crowley, when he started, that's why he got Boleskine House on the shores of Loch Ness, because of the invocations he was doing and the water, the tying to the water. And there's always a reason, like you said, if you don't know what you're looking at,
there's always a reason. You have to figure out they don't just pick random places. It's very intentional. The places that they, like the Georgia Guidestones that are now down, like it's very intentional where they put the Georgia Guidestone. It's always intentional. They're trying to summon, because they can't create anything, guys. They can't. So they're trying to summon what's there. Right. And so when, let me see here. So when he died, when Sammy Boy died, the estate was gifted to the city in 1940. So he died in 1940, and it became Untermeyer Gardens. So over time, between 1940 and the 1970s, when the Son of Sam murders happened, so the 30-something years, the land and the property went into decay. It was not managed. So it was this beautiful, beautiful land when Untermeyer was there. And then it became a lot of graffiti, overgrown. Part of me thinks they did that on purpose to kind of hide what was coming, because I know they look at specific astrological stuff as well. We know we're coming to the age of Aquarius, which I think that they have tried to hijack. They just try to hijack it because we have to give our collective consciousness for things to happen to the programming. So I always speculate everything is for a reason. Well, in the 1970s, people would see torches in the park. They would hear chanting. And sadly enough, they would find dead dogs. Now they would sacrifice German Shepherds specifically. And somebody had said that it had a lot to do with like female goddess worship for the German Shepherds. But we know, and the Process Church of Final Judgment, which is an offshoot of Scientology, was also working in that area. I'm not going to say too much about them because they're
the only goddess I can think of off the bat that somebody would connect to dogs would be Hecate. And at the same time, there's nothing there about sacrificing dogs. I don't know.
No, and Hecate, I've done a lot of research into her, and sometimes I think these poor deities they're being manipulated. Like,
and don't get me wrong, I know that there's people that do some stuff with Hecate that's on the dark side. I know there's a darker version. Depends on, like you said, intent. What is your intent? I know that. But I think that, and I'm still not sure what the tie-in is specifically for German Shepherds. I'm not sure. It's just not a dog.
It's for feminine. The German Shepherds are like feminine deity worship, and yeah, I don't know either because I don't do that. Like you don't do that. We see a dog and we just want to love it and pet it and cuddle it, right?
I've got 8 of them. I've got 8 of them. Come here, you guys, and they're all here, like looking at me, like what? And of course, they're all rescues, but believe me, I get it.
Yeah, it's disgusting. And I don't want to, I mean, it's even in the Netflix series where they go through Maury Terry's book, which is surprising that Netflix did that, even though at the end they're like,
I know they kind of made him sound like he was a drunkard and didn't know what.
But they actually tell you kind of the truth in the beginning, and they have witnesses giving their testimony of when they were like, I don't want to be a part of this. So there was already speculation that there were shenanigans going on at Untermeyer Park. People would call in complaints, but nothing was ever done. And unfortunately, nowadays, to hurt an animal in most situations is a crime. But in the 70s, it just wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. Your animals were not given the same.
Yeah, no, protection. It was, there was some.
Yeah. So, and this is where people saw David Berkowitz with the Carr brothers.
Yes.
And that's where it gets interesting because they got the name the Son of Sam from some letters that the killer had left at the crime scene. And he talks about being the son of Sam. Well, my friends, the Carr brothers, John and Michael Carr, their father's name was Sam. Mm-hmm. And in this book, Dead Names, there is speculation. Berkowitz had a very sad, I have a lot of empathy for Berkowitz. He had a very sad,
when you listen,
yeah, he was vulnerable. And I think he was looking for, he had been adopted. He went and served in the army. Then he found his birth mother, and he realized his birth mother didn't know who his father was. And back in the 70s, finding that out, I think probably did more to his.
And she kind of rejected him.
Yeah.
I think that's really the one that was for him, was that it's not like somebody that maybe gave up a child in adoption when they're young and then they're like, I'm sorry. And yes, she kind of she had her own another family.
And you're right. Like if somebody has a baby young and gives the child up and the child finds, the mother can say, I loved you so much. I wasn't right. I wasn't prepared. And I want to make sure that you had a good life. And let's, it was very, it was
let me reject you again.
And his adopted mother had previously passed away and he didn't like his step. So there's just a lot of turmoil in his life. And people,
you know what? Brice, one of the things I've seen with a lot of these people that join these, whether you want to call them cult or dark practices, is this deep rage against God.
Yeah.
This is the impetus for them.
Yeah. Life is unfair. Why me? Why me? And I think for him, and people speculate that there could have been something that happened to him in the army too. Like, did he get subjugated to some mind? We know that the army and I love our military men, but we know that there are some sections of the military that will experiment things on people that they consider to be throwaway people, which I don't think any human is a throwaway person, but we know that they maybe saw this guy who really didn't have any family and he's young and so there might have been some tampering with his mind.
Yes.
That's the speculation though. And so he starts to get into the occult, which, a lot of people do turn. I mean, people go see tarot readers when they're having a bad day or they need guidance, right? And this is why you have to be really careful with spiritual healers and guides, because you have to make sure they have your best interest at heart. A good spiritual leader or healer is not going to they're always going to allow your free will. They're never going to try to tell you what to do. They're going to tell you what they see in the cards, and then you make the decision, or try to heal you where you are now with your wounds, and then let you live your best life. They're not. So I think he must have fallen into a crowd. And that's the thing with black magic, right? I just said, the devil will give you things pretty instantly.
Yeah, the beginning, everybody is your friend and it's all wonderful.
Yep. You just don't realize that you're going to be, months later, you're going to have to be the scapegoat for these murders. The devil always comes to pay. And so there are a few shops in New York at the time, the Magic Child Shop. My friend Rocker Mike knows a lot more about these shops, where allegedly he was hanging out with the Carr brothers. And Rocker Mike also shared with me, again, this is something only a New Yorker would really know. The fact that Berkowitz moved to Yonkers was very strange for his job. So it's speculation that he moved there to be closer to the cars. And where the cars lived, they were in walking distance to Untermeyer Park. And there's lots of stuff in this letter about allegedly about the Father Sam Carr doing specific things to his children that you also see in these cults.
Yes.
Now, John Carr, the brother, his picture matches a lot of the eyewitness sketches. And I even watched somebody talk about when people give sketches to the police, and very rarely are they wrong. Like very rarely. Usually they're pretty close, because if you're being, if you think about a time in your life where something really traumatic happened, either good or bad, because something really good can also have the same,
your memory stays fresh with it.
It like I can remember clothes I wore when I was 4 when something happened, like everything just kind of. So when a witness to a crime gives a sketch, they have that face in their head. That face is probably gonna be in their head forever. And so this guy was saying, like, very rarely, if at all, are eyewitness testimonies wrong. And the fact that not only were the police saying that it was obvious there were different people doing this because of the eyewitness testimonies. But the police not only were saying, oh, one person was wrong, they were saying that all the witnesses were wrong. That's impossible. That is impossible. And then you would look at pictures of John Carr, and John Carr would match some of the.
And the thing is that they think that maybe they even convinced him to take the fall, thinking, you're going to do that crazy story about the dog and the demon.
Yes,
they're going to put you in an insane asylum. You're not going to go to prison. Don't worry.
We'll get you out.
We'll get you out. Exactly.
We're your family now. We're your support. And if you're that desperate, you're going to, we know Berkowitz was at least there for some of the killings.
Yeah.
There's different speculation as to why they did this. Some people believe it was just to cause chaos, because when there's chaos, there's loosh, which is that lower vibration that the demons can feed off. I also think there probably was something else to the spilled blood that we.
Yes, I believe that probably was one of the big.
Yeah, the spilling, and it probably. I mean, I don't even think we know the half of it as just regular people. We're finding what we can. And especially since most of these victims were young people, like, that breaks my heart. A lot of these victims were like young girls, like 18, 19 years old. It's the time of disco, especially the first 2 victims, they were coming home from the discotheque. Like they were probably sitting, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. They're probably sitting in that car, gossiping about some boy they saw. So super innocent, like super excited about their future. They're at 18, you're still a kid.
Yes,
and then
exactly.
To have we know that in this group they like taking the innocent because that's the pure energy, right? So I think there's more. And
I'm going to tell you, this is what I think, and to the point of what you're making. If you think about it, and you'll see it maybe with some killers, they'll go after soft targets, prostitutes, drug addicts. No, that's not what they wanted. They wanted the victim that you just described.
With the family, with the mourning, with the sorrow, the pain.
Yes, there you go. It's that ripple effect of agony that you spread out from that one incident.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that Maury Terry points out in his book that with all the publishing they did around these murders, basically they terrorized the city.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
By extension.
People were, like I said, people were changing their hair color. Women, Rocker Mike talks about his mom. He was a little kid at that time, but his mom changed her hair because women were terrified, and I would say too, this is the 70s. And I know that men, especially fathers of these daughters, I think men want to protect their children, want to protect their wives. And when you can't, because you don't know who you're protecting them from, there was one case where a girl was walking home from school and he just walked up and she put her textbook up and he shot her through the textbook. She's walking home from school. She was holding her textbooks. Like
that's why I'm saying that's for lack of, how you always hear about these virgin sacrifices. This is about as close as they could get to it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the pureness, the innocence, the hope of the future. It's just disgusting. So that's, let me see here. So Maury Terry was the person who brought up Untermeyer Park. And again, in this book, they do reference it. So it was like in this book, Simon, who wrote it, it's a fake name. basically refers in this book that everybody in the occult scene in New York knew that this was part of the process Church of Final Judgment, that they were sacrificing German Shepherds. And as we were saying, allegedly, we'll say, they have an animal rescue operation out in Utah nowadays. And
right now,
in my
right
opinion,
now, which, by the way, they've gotten, let me stress this, millions of dollars a year in money. Okay, they renamed a canyon out there. And you know what it is? And if you tell people this is a place for abused animal, everybody goes, oh my God, okay. You know, like,
no, what are they do? Like, this is concerning to me. If your organization has a history of sacrificing German Shepherds and is tied up, whether it's speculation or not, if the name has been tied up with all these big murder cases, I don't think you should have a nonprofit. I just, that's...
And they've been around for quite a while because they relocated from Arizona up to there. And real quick, but people, it's insidious, that in the book, he describes how they even would get jobs in like the dog pound and animal control so that they could have access to, let's say, if they were looking specifically for German Shepherds. As a matter of fact, I believe Berkowitz, either they did or they were about to get him a job in an animal control so that they could have easy access to that specific dog. Okay.
If I had millions and millions of dollars, I would go and buy a bunch of land, and I would take all the animals that are in kill shelters, and I would bring them and put them on the land and just hire a bunch of people to come and take care of them and love them. And the fact that it's
mind-boggling. When I read that was like, that's pretty horrible. And when they brought up the fact that because a couple of boys had found the dead dogs bound in plastic, they had buried them. When all this came out after they arrested Berkowitz, the sister of one of the boys went to the police and said, hey, this might have, and they were like, no, that's nothing to do with it. But hey, he shot dogs. He was saying the dog was the demon. Nah.
The police will tell you you're just crazy. You're just a tinfoil hat.
Yeah, and of course that where they were practicing is the aqueducts. It's the abandoned aqueducts with the water right there.
Exactly, the tunnel system, which how much I've learned about tunnel systems. So I would highly, for our friends watching or listening, I would highly suggest getting The Ultimate Evil, the book by Maury Terry, but also this name, Dead Names by Simon.
Yes.
It's about the Necronomicon, which is a totally different subject in itself.
Let me tell you, when you start reading that thing, that's like, it grabs you. It's like, holy crap.
It is so, I've highlighted, because there are just so many things. I'm like, I got to go look this up. I told my friend Mike that I want to do a show on the witch wars. There was witch wars in New York City in the 70s. And I'm like, tell me about that, because nobody's ever told me about the witch wars.
No, but that's a thing. All these things are going on like below the surface, and us normies, I'm going to call us all normies because that's what we are. We're totally ignorant that any of this crap is happening.
It's unbelievable. But the more, and that's why it's super important to, as far as coming into this great awakening, the most important thing you can do is work on yourself and really find your own self, your own autonomy, your own sovereignty, your own spirituality, your own relationship with God, apart from everything, because everything has been corrupted. Everything in our world has been corrupted. And I also want to say too, I get this a lot, if we were to throw away everything that this group has corrupted, we would have nothing left. And so we need to be the side of loving, mercy, and grace, and healing the land. And because it was all created by the light anyway. And so, but the best thing you can do, as my favorite channeling board, the Cassiopeans, they always remind you, knowledge is power, knowledge protects, and knowledge is infinite. Just get yourself, be knowledgeable. If something feels weird, because these groups are still out there doing their shenanigans.
Oh, no, yeah, I know. Now it's like, and this is the thing, Brice, but people don't, now people are becoming, I want to say like black pilled. Is that the word for it?
Yeah, not red pilled, because they get depressed about it. Look at what happened with P. Diddy. And
that's another one. It's like, come on,
let's.
Allegedly, if anything, how long do you think everybody around it, just like?
I think he was like a Berkowitz. I think because there's no loyalty among things. I think they threw him out.
Something is like, who got mad at you?
Yeah, they need to give us something because too many people are waking up. Too many people are
right,
Too many people are questioning why Oprah Winfrey is still out doing her thing when she's.
It's like Weinstein. Like Weinstein is like, man, who you you must have really crunched somebody's toes big time.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like, look at all these people, like P. Diddy, Weinstein, like how powerful and untouchable they seem to be.
Yes.
But with this group, there's no loyalty amongst thieves. The devil always comes to collect his dues. Do not, like, I understand. I believe that the world is magic. I think we're all magic. I love studying cultism and esoteric. And I think if you're in the sight of light, it's this beautiful way of expressing light. It can be fun. Don't do anything, especially if you're like a young kid. Like, don't do anything that's going to require any type of sacrifice, because that's not good. The light will never ask you to do that. The light will never ask you to do that.
Let me tell you something. I was born and raised in Miami. You talk about there's a lot of religious there that involves animal sacrifice. That you go to the cemetery and it's like, a dead. You know, you go to Crossroads. I have found backpacks full of dismembered chickens.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's yeah.
I mean,
I was.
So when you talk about something that you have to feed with blood or with anything, by the way, anything, it's like, I don't care what you want to call it.
It's not your place to direct the life of another living being.
No.
And I was laughing. I was up in New England. I was up in Salem, Massachusetts a couple summers ago, which it was nothing compared to the down south. Like, Salem wasn't spooky at all. It actually felt like
it's very like touristy kind of thing.
Yeah, it's not like, my mom was from Charleston, South Carolina. I'm like, there's way more spooky shit in Charleston than there is here. But they won't let you touch the graves. And I was like,
really
weird. Because in the South, that's never going to work. People are always leaving stuff in the graveyards. Like, even the light, even the people that practice the light will come and get some dirt from the graveyard. Will come and leave rocks and pennies on graves.
Yeah. I've been down to a graveyard here, and I'm coming, and there's a wall, and there's a tall glass of clear water on it. It's like, okay.
Alcohol for that's like, I'm like, that would not work in the South, because all the people in the South would be like, come into the grave. I mean, it's kind of sweet. You go to cemeteries. I mean, it's sad because of children, but if there's children's, you see toys left at their graves all the time. Yes. And so I'm like, that doesn't fly. There's people are constantly doing these things in the South, which there's a good side and there's a bad side, and it's your choice, your free will choice, which side.
With the intent. It's all based on intent.
Yeah.
What is your intent behind your actions?
Are you service to self or service to others? Are you here to help heal yourself, to be a better contributing part of humanity? Or are you here doing this for your own selfish greed? You know, because it's but that's you guys, I can't wait to hear from your audience about
Brice, what is, I'm going to put your link in the credits of the show, but for the podcast listeners, how can they find you?
I'm on Esoteric Atlanta on YouTube and Rumble. And that's where I get shadow banned a lot on YouTube because we
were talking about that, folks, before we started recording, and I'll leave that to your imaginations. This should come as no surprise.
I usually have to be kind of careful. You know, we come up with clever words for this.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's like,
it's awful, but I'm on Rumble,
talking code kind of deal.
I have a backup channel on Rumble, so I always encourage people to subscribe to Rumble as well.
Yes.
And I'm going to be sharing this link to on my channel.
Yes, I will be sending and I know you got something to do, but later on we got to talk, because you know that around the time of that there was women, the Dart Man was going on, and they almost think it was the same people that were doing the Son of Sam killings. That they were shooting darts at women.
Put you in touch with Rocker Mike too, because
yes.
Oh, and I forgot, I'm also on Gnostic TV under the Esoteric Explorer series. I'm on Gnostic TV as well, and I was telling you that, just to give you guys a little teaser, I am planning on a show with the Process Church, but because the Process Church is still active, I've been warned. So we're going to be doing that on Gnostic TV, where there's a little bit more protection. So that's coming. I'm planning that show with a friend who's also researching it as well. So,
let me tell you something. That's got to be so interesting, because as we know, that has a long history in and of itself.
It's spooky. Like, they are a spooky group. So anyway, allegedly,
right? Allegedly. See why?
For entertainment purposes only.
There you go.
So Well, thank you.
Brice, it was wonderful to speak to you. We're going to talk again because we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I cannot wait. I cannot wait. So
take care, darling.
So
Bye-bye. Isn't that interesting? She's great. She's got to come back. Me and my pigeon stuff. Yeah. Yeah. I've been looking so forward to interviewing her because I've been watching her videos and everything. And it's like, oh my God, you know, and usually I don't even, as a matter of fact, you know, right now I've got the TV. Sometimes the multitask where I'm researching and I'm watching something. And when I watch her stuff, it is so absorbing that I wait till I'm in bed watching TV in bed. So I could just, because if I watch it here, I'll stop doing what I'm supposed to be doing on my computer because I'm like, oh my God, you know that. So usually when I look at her stuff, you know, I get notified. I'm a follower. I'm subscribed to her channel. It's like, this is, I know for sure, regardless of whatever the subject matter is, that it's going to be totally absorbing. And it's like one of these things that, wow. And, you know, there's some other stuff like from other channels that I'm running in and I'll go to the kitchen and I'll get something to drink and then I'll come back and it's like, oh, okay. I didn't miss anything. I can catch up exactly where I left off. But not with her. Her subject matter is super, super interesting. And you hear stuff that you're like, incredible. And you know what? I think that's what we need. We how's this? I know that the black-pilled euphemism, if you want to call it that, I don't see it as a black pilling because I'm a believer that I'd rather know the truth, good, bad, ugly, rather than being I mean it's easier on the mind, and I think in the last few years we've kind of been like hit with a 2x4 over the head when it comes to truth. You know, you know what this is all going on. What? But at some point you've got to say, you know what? Not everything is bad, but there's a lot of stuff that that when certain events or history, and I'm a big one for the history thing because I've spoken about it before, where I think a lot of stuff with history has been, what's the word I'm looking for? Massaged. And that's, to put it kindly, to either deviate from what actually happened or to omit certain portions. And it's like, wait a minute. History is history. Even if it's ugly history, you have to deal with it. It is what it is. And hopefully, if it's ugly history, you learn from it. Or if not, it is what it is. That's where the signs of the time. I mean, you look at, like the other day, I wrote an article. What was it about? How the executing somebody by crucifixion predated, you know, when we think of crucifixion as the time of Jesus and, you know, the Roman occupation and all that, the Assyrians, all of these, they were doing crucifixions. You know, this didn't start, and the Egyptians, as a matter of fact, I believe the originators of crucifixions were the Egyptians. But anyway, at one point, you know, when Spartacus had that slave uprising, the Romans crucified 6,000 men along this road as punishment and to show others, of course, if you're a slave, you better not revolt. Okay. And I guess my point is that human life, you know, despite what sometimes we see, I think it has more value now than it did back then. But the history of whatever it is, it's an ugly history, but we learn from it. Like that example, like, my God, you're executing 6,000 people, men or whatever, because they were all men as far as I know, basically as punishment and to psych out the population, you know, because basically this is, so in other words, I think that despite a lot of the things that we see, we're still, I'm a humanist. I believe in the goodness of human beings, despite sometimes examples that is like, no. I agree with Brice. I think that a lot of times evil acts, and I'm not talking about one time, are, what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily that you're possessed, even though I do think that there is such a thing as a perfect possession, but that you have influence from something dark, sometimes more than others. And then you know, we could get into the whole thing of oppression and obsession, and or if you want to say, well, you know, is this person a psychopath and has no what's the word I'm looking for? No conscience. But even then, you'll have psychopaths who are not violent. They're just controlling, but they don't kill anybody. In other words, they don't want to go to jail and prison. They're held back by the law. But honestly, I do think that there is a dark current, and part of the effects of that dark current throughout, especially now as humans have become more literate. When I say humans, I mean the local population, 17th century, because at one point, literacy was basically if you were well born, if you had teachers. So if you didn't have money, if you were, you were illiterate. So as we went into the 17th century and everything, and the general population started becoming more literate, and whether it was with a penny novel, all those things, that there was, how can I say it? There was an effort to disguise the actual history of what was going on, as far as the accurateness, or no, we're gonna, that's when they say, when you win a war, the spoils go to the winner. Well, what goes to the winner also is we'll write the history of this event the way we want. All right. And of course, it never makes them look bad. Of course not. So that's what I'm saying. I think that, and usually when things are hidden, it's for a reason. And in this case, like the subject matter of what me and Brice were talking about, where a lot of this, whether you want to call it history or events, are kind of like disguised. There's a reason for it. Especially when you have the public persona, okay, versus what really goes on behind the scenes. All right. And even when we were talking about how Untermeyer basically, for lack of a better word, put the president of the United States in his back pocket by lending him money so that it wouldn't come out that he had had an affair. Even now, that would have been disastrous for presidency. Remember Clinton, Monica Lewinsky, and that was bad. That was the 90s. Now, can you imagine 100 years before? That was, talk about what a disgrace that would have been. So in other words, it's like when he offered the president back then, I'm going to get you out of your pickle by giving you money. He knew perfectly well that this president wasn't going to say no, because then you'll have power over me, and I'll be forced to make political decisions on what you want. Right? They knew that. It was like, okay, let's, I'm going to strong arm you, and let's just pretend that I'm doing you a favor and lending you money to help you save face with the nation, with your family, and we'll that's what we'll call it, okay? And of course, and then you ask yourself how much of that was pre-planned, right? My point being that none of these things normally will you find it in any history book or anything. And I know, and a lot of times you can say, well, maybe this can never be proven. As for what she was describing though about Untermeyer's history is accurate. It is. That is accurate. That's not like, oh, we think. No. And everybody knows that when you have power, even though you have money, really power is the aphrodisiac that you really want. Let's face it. As much money as you have, all right? Let's say you have all this millions and millions and millions of dollars. We're talking about Untermeyer in this case. We'll use as an example. You have all this money. More money than you could ever use. More money than your family would ever need. So it's not a question of money, all right? You already have a very powerful law firm. As a matter of fact, one of the most powerful in New York of all places, which means you have a lot of power. You could basically do whatever you want. So what else is left? Power over the president of the United States. Hello? That's it. It's like, and probably by the time he went through that, he died in 1940. It's like, okay. But, if there was the king of the world, he'd try to go after that too. In other words, sometimes it's not the question of the money. It's a question of the power and the seduction of, because really at the end of the day, which I'm not being idealistic. Always, the president could have said, nah, you know what, I'm not going to take your money because, you know what, I know what comes with it. And let's face it, I'm sure that they had met behind the scenes before that scenario popped up. He knew of Untermeyer if he hadn't met him before personally. I'm not sure, but wasn't. So he probably knew who this man was, or maybe what his dealings were, or what reputation he had. So honestly, at the end of the day, everybody does have free choice. He could have said, "Okay, let it come out. We'll let that come out. All right, so be it." But let's talk realistically. This man was not about to lose his presidency and basically not only disgrace himself, but disgrace his family, because back in those times, this would have overshadowed not only him, but his family. It would have been a catastrophe. And his kid, everything. It would have, that shit flows downward kind of deal. All right. So, and when she pointed out that even those actions that were taken, over 100 years ago, the repercussions, we in the modern times are still feeling it. All right. Because of certain acts, certain things that were done that were in that actual law, or things that were like okayed. All right. And here we are, fast forward 2024. And even now, all these people are long dead, buried, and pushing up daisies. And half the times you don't even know their names if you heard them. They're still, the effects of their actions, we're still being overshadowed by that. All right. And I guess the point is, to me personally, I think that when you have this deep thirst that's never quenched, that there is no saturation when it comes to power, and like I said, money, forget it, it's beyond money, power and more power. There's usually there's something dark that walks with you. Okay. It's almost like this is the master that you serve. All right. And whether you want to call it the devil, I think that each of these people, besides the devil, like up there, they have their own personal darkling that walks with them, and that they have to propitiate with whatever it is, And I'm here talking about, the blackmail, or the money and the control and the ability to, I'm going to direct stuff that's going to affect millions of people that lived in the United States. That's what we know about. Like she said, in those, that house that he had built, which was hundreds of acres, which was very unusual, because I've seen some of the statues that were still left over. You could have done anything on those acres and acres. Nobody was going to know. You could have had any type of ceremony out there. There was nobody that's going to remember. No cameras, hundreds of acres. Who's going to see what? No drones, Your guest, whoever. Think of, let's go Hollywood here. Think of Eyes Wide Shut, where all these people show up at this chateau and they've got their masks on, but hey, everybody keeps each other's secret because they're all dirty. Same thing here, and in that case, of course, the character played by Tom Cruise, he gets an entree because he's trying to help out one of the guys who's got girlfriend problems. But it's the same thing. Everybody keeps each other's secrets. Your servants stay out there, and they're like, I'm not saying shit. I don't know nothing. I want to keep my job. They go in there. They could have done anything in those gardens. As far as ceremonies, sacrifices, you name it. And there was nobody to be no wiser. And then let's all go back and pretend like we're like the upstanding, like upper crust of, in this case, let's say the New York families, or the New York, elitists are the ones that, the movers. There's the Gilded Age, or the entry to the Gilded Age, where that kind of deal. And I'm not saying that all of them were there. But a good portion of them is like, hey, we're going to Untermeyer's today. Oh yeah, okay. Let's need I say more? That kind of deal. So for all the things that we do know, I'm sure there's a lot we don't know. Like I said, walls could talk. And again, there's things that when you look at it at the first blush, you go, in other words, unless you have the eyes to see, as far as what she said, the proximity to water, even that what they call the Devil's Cave, which is where they found later on. This is around the time of the Berkowitz and all that. That also where they found the remains of the dead dogs. That it was a part of an abandoned aqueduct. You know, because remember, this area grew and there was a hospital eventually that was, I want to say, I can't remember if it was St. John Hospital. I'm not that familiar with it, but you know, slowly the city encroached on this property, and I think they sold off parts. And part of what Brice said, you know, did they intentionally allow this to go to wreck and ruin? Because remember, when this gentleman was alive, he had lots of money to pay groundskeepers and gardeners to keep everything like all, you know, trimmed and the lawn. But, you know, once he was out of the picture and he gave this house to the local government, maybe they, whether intentionally, what was it, by accident or by design, let it go wild. And of course, you don't upkeep it. And then that's what happens at that point where this was going on. It was like a place people would hang out, do drugs, prostitution. And in this case, they had that little aqueduct cave, whatever, that where they found some graffiti and stuff that was occult symbolism. All right. That they were saying this is where part of these ceremonies or where they gathered. And by the way, when you look at this, these were not like teenagers doing stupid shit. These were already full-grown men and women. And as a matter of fact, one of the people that they considered that was among the suspects, even though, of course, Perkowitz was the only one, was a woman. You know, a woman with a hat on, you know, like one of those like Scully cap kind of deals. And let me tell you something. And when you read, which by the way, I do recommend, it's a big, thick book, and you could tell this man, Maury Terry, put a lot of years of research into it. Basically, the most, what's the word I'm looking for? The most vicious or cold-hearted was that woman. All right. As far as who was directing. And I'm not kidding. Most of the people around Berkowitz ended up, I believe one committed suicide. Another one died in a horrible car crash. Like really, like that, almost like, if I remember correctly, almost like an accident. Like, was it suicide where the guy killed himself in the car wreck? One of those deals. And Son of Sam was Son of Sam, the car father, or Sam Untermeyer who is the Sam in Son of Sam. There's a lot of, and it's almost mind-boggling because it was thing that was like, man, what is there, symbolism or some hidden truth or some message behind everything? Brice is absolutely right. There is a method to the madness of the symbology, whether it's certain statues or locations or dates or names. In other words, that unless you have eyes to see it, to recognize it, you don't get it. You don't get it. But when you're in the inn or you know what you're looking at, you realize, okay, this did not happen then, just by sheer chance on that date or at that location or to those people. Or the place where this house was erected, or that park, or that whatever. That was, yeah, you think it could have been anything. No. Usually there is some type of thread. And because in anybody that has studied ritualism, especially occult, this is certain dates. How's this? If you're going to do an invocation or some type of spell work or ritual, whatever you want to call it, or ceremony, the timing on it is really important. The timing on it is really, really important. In other words, it's not like, oh, well, today, no, today's not the right day. No, today we're going to do it. The timing on it, sometimes even to the time of the day, if it's a certain date, is important. I mean, is in exactly that. All right. So, but most people don't recognize it because, like I was telling Brice, us normies, we're like, we don't live life that way. I mean, the most people do is, I'll read my zodiac. You know, if you're it, and even then, it's like, or like we were talking about it being Mercury retrograde, but beyond that, that's all it is. But there's for people that are trying to work maybe dark rituals, dark magic with a K at the end. If you want things to work the way you want them, or what your intent, what you want it to like do, you plan that out the right way, including in this case what we were talking about. I wouldn't be surprised, you know, and I'm going to bring Brice back so we could talk about the tunnels and a lot. I mean, there's a lot. Believe me, there's a lot to unpack. This is just a small. If you ever have a chance, and if you haven't, get that book from The Ultimate Evil from Mortuary. Let me tell you, I started reading it on record, and it's a big thick book, and I still have it. I have it on the dashboard, and it's one of those things that it just keeps going and going, and you're like, and let me tell you something. Whether you agree with his findings or not, you realize this man, because that's one thing, he poured a lot of effort into his research and providing why he came up with that idea and how he came up with that idea. And what I said, when he started in on this investigation, which of course this was right before, this is before Berkowitz was arrested. This is when the son of Sam, these murders, he was a reporter. He didn't go into this thinking, oh, I'm gonna, it would evolve into like a 10-year research project or something like that. He thought he was just reporting on these series of murders. Like she said that at the beginning, they really didn't think of it as like what we know now as serial killers or serial killings, or the perpetrator was one person, or like later on it became that, hey, but wear a blonde wig because he seems to be targeting dark-haired women. All right. Now, when at the beginning he just went in there to write a story of, obviously that was capturing everybody's attention in New York because, that kind of deal. So I'm telling you, if you ever have the chance, read it, and I'm telling you, it'll absorb you and it'll make you see things or learn things that you're like, man. And once you read it sometimes though, and you go, man, that isn't far-fetched, because he does. I have to give him, his research is impeccable. You read it and it's almost, when you read it, it's almost like you have people way at the top have a lot of money, sometimes positions in public. They have this persona, but they're still involved. But then they have these people down at the bottom, okay, which are the ones, if you want to lack of a better word, does the dirty work for them. Okay, and there's also, like I said, there's a thread of pornography, child pornography, drug distribution, murder for hire. But they all swirl around that dark belief system. All right. Which, by the way, she was entirely accurate when she says, if at any point you become a hindrance, or they see that, hey, this person got busted, and and you're associated, and you might go down, and they'll buy. In other words, talk about the no honor among thieves. Forget that. There is, if they perceived you, which makes you think, who would want to work in a group like this? Like, you got to be kidding me. In other words, there's nothing that says, no matter how good of a follower you were or are, or how much you did, and if you killed multiple people and you did whatever, if at any point they thought that you might be a liability, that's it. You were gone. And unfortunately, a lot of these people, they lived lifestyles where, not all the time, especially with these, what I call the people that were doing the dirty work, that if they would have turned up dead, sometimes in very weird circumstances, or suicides. If you read in the book, there's some suicides that are very questionable. Like, what? How could this person? The suicide really doesn't make sense. How can I say it? There was nobody, like, whether it's a family member or anybody, that pushes the police department to say, man, that doesn't right. No, you need to investigate this more. It was just like brushed under the rug. Like, okay, oh, too bad. Oh, he killed himself. Oh, well, that kind of thing, And yeah, and you'll see that there's like a bi-coastal element to it. And a lot of it started also like in the 1960s, which by the time Berkowitz started, that thing was like 10, 11 years old. It's a very interesting, but the ultimate point is that a lot of these groups have gone underground, deep underground. They've learned how to disguise themselves. And a lot of that activity is still going on. And I'm not gonna say more because I'm gonna wait till I do the next show with Brice, and we're gonna go there. Did you see what she said about where you have to find her to go to Gnostic TV to see that special she's gonna do on the Process Church? There's good reason why she's gonna do it that way. So I urge you, like I said, you can find her on YouTube on Esoteric Atlanta, but I will have a link to her show. And by the way, let me show you real quick here something that I mentioned as far as, let me see, having to do with the that there was very similar incidents around the time of the Son of Sam thing going on. Okay, here we go. All right. And this has to do with, this is up on Stranger Than Fiction Stories. All right. Having to do with, Westchester County was where a lot of these things were going on. And there was these incidents, okay, where there's a reference to this guy that they called Dartman. They called him Dartman. And what he was doing was, the first time is some lady gets shot through, she's standing at her kitchen window, and she gets shot like by a steel tipped dart, like a thing, and it hits her she's pregnant, hits her in the neck. Her husband runs outside, there's nobody there. Okay, he ended up wounding 22 women with his air gun, and he was firing pencil with metal tipped darts that are about 1 inch long. Okay, talk about weird. Now, all of this happened like in the span of 2 weeks. And later on, which is part of this thing about that I think the police departments didn't want to get too wild on this because they had David Berkowitz, and that was like, that's it, he's the one and he's the only thing. And that people were asking, hey, after his, all these attacks stopped, kind of deal. And Dartman was going on, and then when the Son of Sam case broke in August of 77, okay, then everybody forgot about Dartman, okay? Or they used to call him the Westchester Dark Sniper, all right? And some people did ask, hey, by any chance, could he be that? Is there any connection? But of course, maybe I see it from the prosecutions. It's like, we don't want to muddy the water. This was the one guy, and who cares if he shot some darts at women, which, by the way, could have been lethal. They weren't, but could have been lethal. We've got the guy who's been shooting people when they're parked in their cars. Okay. Even now, there's still speculation that if not David Berkowitz, was it the same group of people? All right. And that it all kind of happened also in that same, how can I say, that same area of Yonkers. And then Maury Terry, while he's investigating the Son of Sam case, because then you're thinking, well, what does a guy with a dart, an air dart thing have to do with shooting people? And when he's investigating, he finds a reference to Dartman as a 15th century symbol for death. And during his research, he found that the symbols and occult clues would be left at scenes that were most difficult to recognize for what they were. And he found that there's a painting dating from 1561, this is medieval times, painting Death and the Miser by Hieronymus Bosch. And he's depicting the deathbeds. You remember, these are around the times that, because of the plague and other things like that, there was a lot of picture reference to death. In which death creeps into the room holding a long, thin dart. not the scythe. You know, people are used to seeing for the Grim Reaper. And then there's another thing, another painting, same time period more or less, called the Dance of Death. Same thing. The death is holding a short pointy item, like very much like the metal tip darts. All right. So again, you know, you might think, well, boy, you're reaching there, Marlene. But I don't think so. I really don't think. There's something there that you think, you know, when you get some crazy people that basically you're trying to terrorize people, and whether, well, obviously shooting somebody in the head is more lethal than a thing. It's like there's something there that's driving this, and of course it all faded away, and you know, David Berkowitz is still doing time for that. And a lot of times they believe that one of the things he stated was that even when he went to prison, he kind of expressed like, I'm not, because Terry tried to interview him several times, and in other words, he was pushing this theory like, hey, there's more than this one guy involved in this. I'm not saying he didn't do it. I'm just saying there's more people involved in this. And that every time law enforcement or a prosecutor or something was trying to talk to him like, hey, throw us a bone, help us, you know, he was, and the fear was that his adoptive dad was, you know, out in the world. And the fear was not only that something would happen to him in prison, he had a lot of fear for his family on the outside, you know. And there you go. And now he's I believe he's very much a born-again Christian, and I believe he does a lot of ministry work in prison, which is good considering, because I'm sure he was involved in it. I'm sure he maybe pulled the trigger, but that he was the only one, nah. If you read that book, you're gonna realize, no, there was more than. But anyway, I hope you like this show with this interview with Brice. I'm gonna have her back most definitely. We got a lot of stuff that we could cover, and I've got a lot of other interesting guests coming on lined up. All right. Also, don't forget to sign up for my Substack newsletter. Go to mppellicer.com, mymagoschronicles.com. There you can find links to everything. Go to erie.news. I've put articles up there. I narrate. I talk about news, you know, so if you want to listen to it, you can find me on Spreaker for all the shows, whether it's Eerie News, Stories of the Supernatural, Nightshade Diary, Supernatural Storytime. You can, all over there, you can find the podcast version. All right. And again, I want to thank you for spending this time with me, and please come back, and we'll go into some more interesting and weird stuff. Take care.